Hello, everybody. My name is Michali Friedman. I am the director of Embrace Therapy, and tonight I'm going to be taking over OKclarity's Instagram to talk to you about my true calling and passion in life, which is marriage and intimacy. Welcome, everybody who's joining. So tonight's topic is marriage and intimacy, and the reason that I am particularly excited about tonight's live is because this is really what I do in my own work and my own practice. And the reason that I do what I do is because ultimately I'm a hopeless romantic. I believe in the beauty and the sanctity and the depth that marriages bring to people. And I'm going to talk to you more about that tonight. So I also have a bunch of questions that were submitted beforehand. And just like I've done in previous lives, if we have time for more questions, then you guys can just put in the comments section your questions and I'll answer them at the end. But just a little bit of a preview as to some of the questions that we're going to be answering tonight that were previously submitted are how can we properly prepare ourselves for the intimate aspect of a marriage? Is 18 too young to start dating? My parents' marriage is beautiful. How to deal with thoughts that my marriage will not be as beautiful? Do you recommend speaking about physical intimacy with a partner before engagement? These are some of the questions that were raised. Really, really great questions on this topic. So before I answer them, let's just define what a marriage is. Let's define what intimacy is. And once we have a better idea of what those two things are, then it might be a little bit easier to answer these questions. So really a marriage, if you look at like the history of a marriage, people used to get married for all kinds of very unromantic reasons. A lot of times marriage was a business deal. And it was a partnership, not just between the guy and the girl, but also between families and communities. Marriage was a way of bridging people, businesses, things like that. People did not marry because they loved the other person. A lot of times people would just marry because they were told they need to marry that person. And that was kind of that. If you were lucky, you liked the person you were married to. And if you were like most people, you were okay and kind of tolerated the person that you were married to. Fast forward to nowadays where there's a lot of pressure on modern day marriages. We have to be each other's best friends. We have to have a physically intimate relationship that feels great for us. We have to be financial partners. We have to be co-parents. We have to be able to tell each other anything, and we have to be able to talk to each other in the most amazing way. We need to share all responsibilities, and we need to feel this in-love feeling all the time, right? These ideas are a lot of what gets circulated in, pop culture nowadays when it comes to marriage. And Esther Perel, she's a sex therapist, and she's a very famous TED talker. She discusses a lot this idea of like how much pressure there is on marriages today. And there's so many buckets that need to be filled through a marriage that used to not have to be filled through a marriage. And we used to get those needs met through a village of people, not just one person. So it's important to understand the history of marriage because that really gives us an understanding of A, what's considered normative, but also B, what might work or not work for us, what we choose to accept from our society and what we choose to reject from our society based on what works for us individually. Now, when it comes to, a Jewish perspective on marriage, we have oftentimes, so let me just backtrack. The way that we're going to define marriage for ourselves is going to be based on our unique cultures, where we're holding spiritually and religiously when it comes to our values. It's going to be based on society, like some of the points that we just talked about. It's going to also be defined by how our families look at marriages and the role marriage plays in our own families. And I want to just borrow a concept from one of the Jewish conceptions of marriage, which is this idea of re'im ahuvim, which translates loosely, not really loosely, it translates into beloved friends. And I like using this concept when I define marriage oftentimes with my couples, because really at the core, one of the most beautiful potentials that marriage has for us is there's this loving friendship between two people. There's the love part, and there's also the friendship part. Now, a few weeks ago, I believe it was like 2 weeks ago, I got on OKclarity and I did a live on some of the foundations of intimacy in relationships. And I talked about that at the foundation of any healthy relationship, and especially a marriage, there's safety, trust, and respect. So if that's the foundation, then I believe intimacy is at the core of the home, is at the core of the marriage. That's like the bones and the meat of a marriage. And I believe that physical intimacy is the glue, or the concrete, the cement that kind of keeps everything together. So that kind of segues into defining what intimacy is. Now, I like borrowing this term. I don't know if it's from 12 Steps or from somewhere else, but the way that I like to define intimacy is into me, see, right? That I'm showing you deeper parts of me, deeper layers of me, and you are showing me deeper layers of yourself. And if you think about it, if we were to break down that idea, there's a few steps. In order for me to show you those deeper parts of myself, there's some level of uncomfortable, minimal discomfort, or a lot of discomfort, exposure, right? I'm exposing parts of myself. And that can be really risky and scary, because it leaves us open and raw and vulnerable, right? We risk getting hurt. And if that vulnerability and that exposure is received by the other person, and not just received, but accepted and cherished and treasured, then that reciprocation is how we build connection. And that is how we start to build a strong, emotionally intimate relationship. Now, emotional intimacy can exist not just with spouses. It can really exist between good friends. It could exist between siblings. And it can also exist between spouses. And really, really, it's that reciprocation and that back and forth of, I treasure the deeper parts of you that you risk sharing with me, and you treasure those deeper, more raw layers of me that I risk sharing with you. And with that give and take and giving and receiving, that's where that our connection and really, really deepens. It's the same process when it comes to physical intimacy, right? There's exposure of our bodies, and we're risking exposure of our bodies. It can feel very scary, and we can feel really uncomfortable and vulnerable. And it's when the other person receives that exposure and not just says, okay, fine, whatever, but they're really like, wow, I'm so lucky that you're sharing this part of yourself with me. That's where real physical connection is born too. And that's where physical connection can be expanded upon and deepened. So again, just to kind of recap, physical intimacy is the glue of a healthy marriage. The foundation of a healthy marriage is safety, trust, and respect, like we talked about in the last live. And the rest of the home, the meat of the relationship, is the emotional intimacy, the friendship, the connection that we build through taking risks, healthy, safe, careful risks in exposing the layered, deeper parts of ourselves with another person. And between all of that, that is how we get to this like status of Raya Mahuvim, of feeling this love and this friendship toward our spouses. Now, oftentimes couples struggle with different parts of this home, right? Sometimes we struggle at the foundational level. Sometimes we struggle with the friendship level. Sometimes we struggle with the glue, the physical intimacy. And depending on, what we're struggling with, that's kind of how we're going to address those issues, right? So the intervention has to kind of match what the challenge is. And there's so much to say about that also. But I want to just now break up for a moment. If anyone has any questions, you can put it in the comments. But I'm going to start to answer some questions from the OKclarity community. Okay, so number one, if I am from an Orthodox background, do you recommend speaking about physical intimacy with our partner before engagement, and then in parentheses, if close to the engagement, or during the engagement, or not at all until the first night? What would be the best way to bring this up? And what kind of conversations are appropriate to have in line with modesty, etc.? So this is an amazing question, and I'm so happy that this person asked this question. I wish more people asked this question. This is the kind of conversation that exists in premarital counseling that we offer in my practice because it's such an important component of a relationship, right? Again, it's the glue of a relationship, so of a marriage. So it really is going to depend. I don't want to speak on behalf of my own personal values. When I am guiding people therapeutically, it's really important to me that I'm working within that person's value system. So the fact that modesty has been brought up when it comes to having a conversation tells me that modesty is an important part of their decision making about whether or not to discuss physical intimacy with this person that they're dating. Now, in ultra Orthodox circles, a lot of people they'll kind of default and to not talking about physical intimacy until engagement or until the wedding night. And some people are encouraged by their chassan and kala teachers, their groom and bride class instructors, to have maybe one or two conversations with their fiancés before the wedding. If you're asking me as a marriage and sex therapist, I will tell you that the more communication, the better. And it's going to be really important that you know yourself also. So if it's difficult to have this conversation, let's say in person, especially if, let's say, you are Shomer Negia, which for those of you who are watching this live and who don't know, Shomer Negia is basically when men and women do not touch until they're actually married. And so they're watching their touch, they're protecting and guarding and safeguarding the touch for when they are married. So there can be a lot of boundaries around how we get together with our fiancés when we are engaged to protect that value of not touching prior to marriage. And so if you, let's say, are keeping Shomer Negia, then it can be very arousing to have a conversation about physical intimacy, and it can make it harder to uphold that value of Shomer Negia. So in those cases, then it might be helpful to have a conversation with your rabbi present, or with your chassan and kala teacher present if you trust them, or with a therapist present, or to do it, let's say, over Zoom or by phone call. But I think the reason that it can be helpful to have a conversation about physical intimacy is because there's so much variability and individuality, and there can be personal fears or concerns or questions, and there can be so much reassurance and love and care and tenderness and relationship building kinds of interactions in having this conversation, right? And so if, let's say, you're just nervous, right, it really helps to talk to the person that you're going to be doing this stuff with about your nervousness. And that can be you're like kind of planting a seed for healthy physical intimacy by learning how to talk about these things with that person. When to have those conversations, it's really going to depend, again, on your specific values, your relationship with this person, their own values, etc. Okay. Question number 2. How can we properly prepare ourselves for the intimate aspect of marriage? So this is also a really great question. I'm so happy that everyone's asking these questions because I think that it's just so helpful to have this information ahead of time, and not when we're rushing and planning a wedding and trying to figure out how to furnish our new apartments and we're managing a new relationship during engagement, and then we're also kind of wrapping our head around intimacy all at the same time. So really great questions. So I think that there are a lot of skills that we can learn and practice even before we're in a romantic relationship that really impacts our ability to have a healthy, intimate life. And I've talked about this a little bit on previous OKclarity videos and also on some videos on my own Instagram. So feel free to check out those videos. But in a nutshell, I'll give you some examples of skills that I'm talking about. Communication skills, right? Communication basically means how we give and receive information with our fellow human beings, right? And there are verbal ways of communicating and there are nonverbal ways of communicating. And we don't just communicate with our spouses, we communicate with all human beings. So that means if you want to prepare yourself for the intimate aspect of a marriage, when you're practicing communicating with other people in your life, that is going to help the intimacy of your marriage. And most specifically, part of communicating is learning how to say yes when we mean yes. So what we might call initiating. So ordering food that you want, right? Or planning a get together with a friend of yours, right? That's initiating an interaction and experience with another human being. And the other piece is rejection, right? Learning how to say no respectfully to another human being, right? And that is a skill that exists in the bedroom, but it's also a skill that we use all the time outside of the bedroom, right? So think about, you got the wrong order at a restaurant, and if you have not practiced the skill of rejection, then it might feel really scary and uncomfortable. Maybe you might even feel obnoxious or selfish to go up to the waiter or waitress and say, hey, thank you so much for my meal. It's actually the wrong order. Can you please give me the right order, right? And practicing that skill in so many other settings can be really helpful in the bedroom when, let's say, your spouse is attempting, to try something new in the bedroom and you really don't like it and you don't know how to say no. When you practice the skill, now you know, okay, I can say no and I feel comfortable saying no, and I know how to do it in a kind and loving and respectful way. And again, same thing with initiating, right? The more that we initiate different interactions with people outside the bedroom, the more comfortable we feel initiating interactions with our spouses in the bedroom. Another skill that is really helpful to learn before, so that we can prepare ourselves for the intimate part of marriage, is presence. And, thankfully we live in a day and age where there's Spotify and Pandora and YouTube and so many other amazing platforms and apps that I'm sure many of you already use, that can teach us how to meditate or how to practice mindfulness, right? And for those of you that don't have the patience for it, there are apps and programs that you can literally do like a box breathing deep breathing exercise for like a minute, right? But practicing the skill of learning how to stay in the moment with your sensations that you're experiencing in your body directly, positively impacts your future sex life, because, what makes a physically intimate experience so connective and pleasurable is being in your own head, right? They say the most important part of the body when it comes to a physically intimate experience is actually the brain. Because if you're thinking about your to-do list at work, or you're thinking about the dishes that need to be washed instead of what's happening between you and your spouse in the bedroom, then you're not going to be able to enjoy the moment. And there's a lot of correlation between presence and pleasure in the bedroom. And so when we practice the skill of presence and mindfulness out of the bedroom, then it's going to drastically improve our intimate lives when we're ready for it. So those are just 3 examples of skills that we can practice to prepare ourselves better for an intimate experience. There are many more, but hopefully that will be a good starting place. Okay, question number 3. My parents' marriage is Baruch Hashem beautiful. I am in my late teens and am wondering how to deal with thoughts that my marriage will not be as beautiful because I have more flaws. It's so interesting that this question is being brought up today because I recently had a discussion with a dear friend of mine about the idea of, like, is it better for parents to fight in front of their children so that children learn that conflict exists, or is it better for children to not witness their parents' conflict? And the reason that that idea reminds me, this question reminds me of that, is because I think that this person, if I had to guess, thinks they are more flawed than their parents because they have not seen how their parents have flaws or have navigated those flaws. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that they get to witness and observe such an incredible and meaningful relationship with their parents. I mean, how lucky are they, right? Ashreinu, as we say. But I think that one thing that can be a little risky in that blessing is that they might walk around, as they're saying, feeling like there's something more wrong with them. And the truth is that most of us have the same amount of flaws, or each flaw might be weighted a little bit differently. So like the weights are basically the same. I mean, I'm not gonna like give a statistic on it because I don't have any statistics on that. But I think that if you were to ask any human being on this planet if they have any struggle in this moment, or if they're feeling any kind of stress in this moment, the vast majority of human beings will say, yes, I have struggles. And so, and yes, I have stress. I might navigate stress well. I might navigate my struggles well, but they definitely do exist. And I think that there's like a couple of ways to address this. One is to recognize that your parents absolutely have flaws that they're contending with and they struggle with, and so they might look different than yours, but it doesn't mean that you have more struggle than they do. And then also on the other kind of end of this is there are so many skills that go into creating a beautiful marriage. A beautiful marriage doesn't just happen. Which can sound even more intimidating for some people. But the good news with that is that anyone can learn skills to create a healthy marriage. I truly believe that. And when we learn these skills, that doesn't mean we don't have conflict. Healthy marriages have healthy conflict. Healthy conflict is not the same as screaming matches or swearing. Healthy conflict is learning how to, usually according to the Gottmans, it's agreeing to disagree for the majority of conflict, but navigating conflict in a healthy way means being respectful and assertive and working together as a team to make sure that both of our needs are met, meaning it's not a solution until both people feel good about the solution. And so learning that those are there are many skills that go into creating a healthy marriage, and we can acquire and practice those skills to create beautiful marriages, can give us so much hope that yes, we're flawed human beings, but we all are flawed human beings, and there's no such thing as someone has more flaws than the next person, other than if you're like a serial killer, but I'm assuming that you're not. And then it just comes down to learning these skills. Now, if you're in your late teens, chances are you haven't had many years to practice these skills. And that's like the last point I'm making. There's like a famous story about like this girl whose father is a rabbi, and she gets married to this guy, and she is super unhappy. And she consults with her father, I think, or it was like her own rabbi, and ultimately what came out was that this guy was not like her father, and she wanted someone who was of the same caliber as her father. And her father basically said to her, like, you think I was this version of myself when your mother married me? Of course not. I was a schnook. I was a regular person, And I worked so hard on myself, and I've had many different life experiences that molded me into this version of myself that you're seeing. So, and even myself now, as myself now, I'm not a finished product. I'm a constant work in progress. So I think it's important to also acknowledge that you're young, you're in your late teens, and you're going to continue to have life experiences that mold and shape you. And you're going to continue through those struggles and through life experiences, learn new skills and evolve so that you can show up to a marriage in a healthy, beautiful, enriched kind of way. Okay. The last question before we end for today is 18 too young to start dating? And then in parentheses, it says female. So again, I'm going to say that this is going to depend on your values, on your culture, on your family, what's considered normative for you in the little mini society that you live in. It's not my place to tell anybody that an age is too old, too young, or they're dating too fast or too soon or too slow, any of that. But some things that you may want to consider are, do you feel ready to start dating? Are you dating for marriage? Do you feel ready for a marriage? What kind of skill set do you have to bring to a marriage? What do you have in you that you want to contribute to a marriage? Are you clear on what's good for you, what's healthy for you, what you're looking for? Are you clear on what red flags look like? Are you clear on what some of your non-negotiables are? Do you have any things that you want to work through within yourself prior to getting married? And with that there's a little caveat. We never, there's this idea of like bringing your whole self to a marriage. And I think that is an important point, that we want to be as whole as possible. But at the same time, we're never going to be 100% whole and healed before we get married. We all bring some baggage because we all have lived life. We're not starting a marriage when we're 1 year old. We're starting a marriage if we're 18 at 18 years old and older. So that means if we're 18 years old, we have 18 years of baggage because that's life. And I think it's important to acknowledge that our life experiences do shape us. And there's so much benefit to how those experiences have shaped us. And there's also some healing to be had because of those experiences that have shaped us. And understanding what those experiences are for you specifically and how those have shaped you in a way that benefits you and also gives you work for healing, I think is also really important awareness to have before you start dating. So those are just like some things to kind of think about and sit with. But I wouldn't necessarily harp on your age as much as it is, as I would focus on, these questions. And the last thing is just to make sure, you're not running away from something in order to get married. Sometimes we are living in a home that we really don't like to live in, and a marriage can be a ticket out of that home. And so that would not be necessarily a healthy reason to get married. The reason we want a healthy reason to get married, I mean, there are many, is more because we want to partner with someone throughout life. We want to fully commit to somebody. We know what we have to offer and we know what we want the other person to offer. And we love who that person is. We're not trying to change them or rescue them. And it's really we're focused on being the best versions of ourselves that we can be, having that partner, that life partner by our sides. It's less about someone saving us from another situation. So marriage takes a lot of work. There's no such thing as like happily ever after. We're as we are now, we bring that self into a marriage. We don't just magically change. Our problems don't magically go away. Unfortunately, when we get married, we bring all of that with us. And so thinking about what you're bringing And if you can manage that while managing this other person with whatever they're bringing, and if you feel ready for that amazing adventure, then you go for it, because as I started this whole conversation with, a healthy marriage can be so beautiful and so connective and so profound. And it can also be healing, but that is not the reason why we go into marriage, to experience healing. But one of the perks of being married in a healthy way is that we can experience healing. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you everybody who joined me tonight. And until next time, I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you soon.